Welcome to Fine Line Station, where I read out letters and emails sent by you, the listeners. They are real-life stories about the uncanny, the creepy, and the unknown. I am your host, Charlie Fox, and I hope you're ready to tune in. Today I have an email sent in by an anonymous user. I almost skipped over this one, but parts of the story caught my eye and it seems quite interesting. And after all, you can never have enough tales that start in an attic, can you? So with that, let's take a wander through their story. Hi, I want to share my experience with the whispers I heard in the static, but I have to tell you about the attic first. My childhood home was old. Over 100 years old if you want to be more specific. My grandparents first bought their home in the 40s and did barely any renovations. It was only until my mum and dad inherited the house that they finally started replacing the worn down floors, fixed the leaking roof and repainted the walls. The house was average in size but was 2 stories tall, which made it stand out against all the other old 1-story houses around the area. It had a reasonably sized backyard and a fence surrounding it, making it a great spot to kick my soccer ball around late into the evening. It's odd. My family, mum, dad and my sister and I, lived about 10 minutes away and we would visit my grandparents all the time. We didn't properly move into the house until I was 12 when my grandpa passed away and my grandma moved into a care centre. This place I often visited, which was both familiar to me but also never home to me, was suddenly where I lived. I don't really know the full story, but my mum and her siblings got into an argument over what to do with the house, but I guess she came out on top and we were lucky enough to move in. It was much bigger than where we currently rented, and I was initially very pleased about the backyard becoming an everyday for me. Things were rushed along quite fast, and suddenly the house had new residents. It was a pain moving everything. I really hated packing, and my sister and mum got into several heated arguments. But finally it was done, and we had a new house to explore. Well, new in terms of owning the space instead of just visiting, I suppose. Life got back to the way it used to be. Routines were adjusted, but considering we weren't really that far away from our last place, most things stayed the same. As I said, my parents did some pretty heavy renovations, so dealing with construction people in the house was kind of annoying, but they were usually gone by the time I got home from school. It wasn't until the roof got partially redone that we heard about the attic. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but none of us knew that an attic even existed within the house. My grandparents must have sealed it up and painted over the entrance, and it was so small that no one had seemed to question the gap between the roof and the second floor. It must have been on the house plans or whatever you see when purchasing a home, but it was rushed over so quick I guess neither my mum or dad took notice of it. We asked my grandma about it, but she wasn't holding on to memories super well at that point and didn't seem to know what we were talking about. The theory is that due to the roof issues, instead of fixing anything, my grandfather simply sealed up the attic door instead. Once this was discovered, the construction workers carefully unsealed the door and climbed their way up. Apparently there was a decent amount of water damage in one area, which meant even more repairs, but a few of the storage boxes huddled in the corner remained mostly unharmed. Like any kid, I was very excited by the prospect of a secret room that had been possibly sealed for decades. I bugged my parents non-stop to go up there, and they finally relented and said once all the work was done and it was stable, I could finally explore. Mum made snide comments about all I'd find were spiders, dust, and moth-eaten books, but I didn't care. When the roof was finally fixed, I got my dad to help me bring down the rickety attic stairs and made my way up there. Honestly, it was a little disappointing. I was well into my pirate phase and hoped I'd find buried treasure or some old antiques that would be worth millions. No such luck, unfortunately. Or so I thought at first, at least. The room still smelt faintly of mould and dust, but the worst of the damage was gone. Pushing up my sleeves, I went to investigate the few lone cardboard boxes in the corner, once again hoping I'd find a secret map or something. My dad came with me, and together we ripped open the tape to check each one. The first 2 boxes contained mostly papers and sentimental letters and cards. I didn't care much, there wasn't anything shiny except for a few rust-ridden brooches, but Dad seemed pleased and looked forward to sharing them with my mum. It wasn't until the last box that things got more interesting. It was full of different electronics. There was a large tangled collection of cables of varying blacks, greys and yellowed whites. Then we pulled out a few old VCRs and even a very old film camera with a smashed lens. There were all sorts of old disassembled radio parts too, and at the very bottom we found what Dad said was a modified radio. It wasn't very big, but seemed to be made up of jumbled units pulled from various other models. Dad squinted in confusion over it, and while it wasn't a treasure map, it did look cool enough to use as a prop for my various pretend games. We made our way back down, and that evening my dad helped me sort out the radio. I didn't even think about it until then that it could actually work, but once the batteries were replaced and Dad carefully scraped out the corrosion, it actually started playing. I was thrilled, and even Dad seemed surprised it worked after all this time. While it could connect to various stations, it would drop out frequently, and some of the stations were more static than sound. I didn't care though. It was easy to pretend I was on a secret mission communicating with others through the radio. I showed it to my younger sister, who thought it was creepy, and because I was young and easily offended, I told her the attic monsters would come down at night and eat her up for saying that. I got into lots of trouble for that one. Apparently my sister had nightmares about these giant static shapes that would stick to the shadows and crawl into her room. I didn't mean to freak her out so much, I just wanted to annoy her like she had annoyed me. I kept the radio in my room from then on and used it for my own games. I wanted to share it with friends when they came over after school, but after my sister's reaction, I thought it best to keep it to myself. It almost became a bit of a routine. Every evening while getting ready for bed and brushing my teeth, I would listen to static-filled music. My parents got sick of it pretty fast, but I didn't want to give it up, so I kept it at a lower volume and mostly used it when only I was around. One night I must have fallen asleep with it on, and when my mum checked on me, all she heard was quite static mumbling out of my room. This concerned her, but I overheard my dad say maybe the white noise was helping me sleep, and to just leave me be as long as I wasn't disrupting my sister. After that, I kept the radio on every night. At first, I would toggle around to find the clearest stations and listen to music as I drifted off, but I slowly stopped bothering, instead letting the static fill my ears as I dozed off. It was a few weeks after I started that, I would have been almost 14 at this point, that I started hearing the whispers. I wasn't sure at first. When you are in that half asleep, half awake stage, it's hard to form proper memories and to tell the difference between dream and reality. But after a few nights, I was sure I was hearing words. It only really happened when I was on the verge of sleep, but I started hearing the static warp into a mouth and speak. It was kind of random at first. The first few I can remember were there, here, listen, give. Simple words like those. Eventually, when I got better at being in that in-between state, I heard partial sentences. Find you, crossing between, use this as a bridge. And like when most people are spoken to, I started whispering back. Till this day, I don't know if whoever was communicating with me could even hear me. It wasn't a two-way radio or anything, but I still wanted to try. The static just sounded so inquisitive. I know I probably sound a little insane, but I promise it wasn't just young teenage me playing another one of my make-believe games. This continued for a few weeks. I really should have written down what we spoke about, but I didn't think to do that until the last few times. One night I was too loud in my responses and my sister angrily barged into my room telling me to shut up. She saw me awkwardly on my side, hand grasping the radio and mumbling into it with my lamp shining in my face, and screamed. I guess it would have been quite a sight. My parents rushed into my room and I properly woke up from my dazed state. They were super worried something was wrong, but once they figured out I'd been spending late nights with the radio, that worry turned to anger. I tried to explain to them that I was just talking to my new friend and wasn't doing anything wrong. I remember the look of hesitation that passed over them, but that quickly turned to displeasure as my dad once again explained it was a simple radio. No one was speaking to me and no one could hear me. I began raising my voice that they were wrong, but all that did was escalate everything. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't have mentioned anything to do with why I was using the radio at night, but it was late and I wasn't thinking clearly. And so they took the radio away from me. They took away all my devices, actually, at least for the next 2 weeks, I think. Eventually I got my stuff back, minus the radio, of course. I thought they'd thrown it out and was devastated. I didn't realize they'd put it back into the attic until years later. I did try to find the static again. I tried the TV when my parents and sister were out. I even bought another secondhand radio at a thrift shop, but no luck at all. Life went on. I graduated high school, took a gap year to work, and now I'm living with a few friends. A few months ago, my parents sold the house. My sister got a scholarship overseas, and the house was far too large and expensive to run just for my parents. It was kind of sad to see it go. It had been part of my entire childhood, both as a fun place to visit and then a new home to call ours. By that point, I had already moved most of my stuff out of the house, but last minute my dad asked me to swing by and grab the last few boxes, including a few that had been stored in the attic. I'm sure you can guess what I was able to find. It's been 3 weeks since I grabbed those boxes. Just like last time, I was surprised all it needed was a change of batteries to continue working as it had. And, just like last time, I tried to find the line between sleep and wakefulness when listening to the radio. It took longer than I had hoped, but last night I finally heard the static whispers again. It was different than before. It was still the strange static warped into words, but the sentences feel more formed. Like when a toddler finally starts being able to communicate what it wants instead of just mimicking words. I was asked to share this story. I'd heard of your show before and I figured you'd be my best bet. I've sent you an audio file for you to listen to. This time, I remembered to finally record some of it. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Well, that was certainly an interesting experience you had. As someone who also enjoys white noise when sleeping, I can relate to that, but I can't say I've heard any whispers myself. Part of me wishes I could learn more about you, speaker, especially with your last comments. What do you mean spread the story, as in reach a larger audience? I mean, I can certainly try and help with that. You know, sometimes people email FLS asking for me to analyse stories or ask more questions. I mentioned before, but I prefer to let the senders share however much they want to. And similarly, it's not my place to speculate on them, too much at least. Mind you, it is real tempting sometimes, and I do chat to Rowan about a few, but I think it's best left up to you, the listeners, to think about them yourselves. This has been another broadcast by Fine Line Station. I'm Charlie Fox, and I'll speak to you next time. Oh, my apologies for cutting in after the outro. I hadn't realised the sender had attached the audio file in a different email. My bad. Take a listen though. Maybe you'll hear something interesting.